And welcome to another episode of Double Tap. Today we are joined by man of the hour, Luke, founder of Pixels. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, doing good. Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be on here.
Yeah, excited to have you, man. Um, Before we get into anything, quick disclosures. Nothing in this episode should be viewed as financial advice. It's for entertainment and informational purposes only. The views expressed by Alex and I are our own, and we may have investments in some of the assets or companies talked about, mentioned throughout the show. Um, Unfortunately, that does not include pixels. I feel like this is a recurring theme throughout these episodes where we're like, I don't know, we're missing the boat here. But you guys had a really successful launch TGE event fairly recently.
No, it's been a crazy couple weeks. It's funny because it hasn't even really felt like a high to me. It's more just like okay, wow. Now we have to put in a ton of work over the next like 3, 5 years. And it feels like day one. But yeah, it's exciting for sure.
Sweet, man. Well, before we get into pixels, something we like to ask all of our guests here is what games are you currently playing?
I just started playing Subnautica for the first time. If you ask me what my favorite genre of games is, it's kind of funny. It's walking simulators. um, it's games where I just like enjoy the environment. I like go see places that I wouldn't normally see. Like on my PS4, the game I probably put the most hours into was Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and I barely even played the game. I just sailed around. So yeah, I really love oceans, and yeah, I've been playing that game a ton lately. Also play a ton of Civ or other strategy games like that when I'm like mindlessly trying to kill time. But yeah, I like atmospheres, generally like relaxing games.
Have you
Yeah.
checked out the new Ubisoft like Pirates game? I think it's called like Skull and
I've seen
Bones
that.
or
I haven't
something.
played it yet, but I know I would love that game. It's like multiplayer pirates, right?
Yeah, I think they marketed it as uh, like a quadruple A game or something. I'm not sure
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
marketing is really like hitting the mark, but it's definitely meme worthy. So maybe
No, it
you
looks
need a
really cool.
little.
I just haven't had time to play it yet, but I feel like that is the kind of game I would absolutely love. Yeah, I love sailing and like just outside of like business stuff too. So it aligns. I kind of wish I was making a pirate game. Maybe, maybe that's really the key insight here.
You should check out Pacific Drive as well. It's a new indie title that has like similar vibes to Subnautica. But yeah, really good. Instead, you replace the boat with a car. Um, but like really interesting mechanics in there. So yeah, I recommend you check that one out.
Put in my notes.
Cool. Well, moving on. Um, so Pixels currently has like kind of hit the zeitgeist mostly for the rapid rise in player numbers that you guys saw post migrating to Ronin. Um, what we spoke a lot to Jiho a couple episodes back, and I think we've covered a fair amount of like the Ronin effect, both like here as well as on socials. What I'm more interested in is like how you view um, the kind of play to earn component of pixels, how that plays into this UA flywheel, and like is there anything else that we're missing that got you to where you are today in terms of like player numbers and activity?
Yeah, totally. So we've been building for 2.5 years. We've had the game live for over 2 years now. And I have pivoted my opinions a lot on what I think Web3 should be doing inside of a game. Um, at first I was like a full decentralization maxi where I was like every single action needs to be on chain, including like every single sword hit, things like that. And yeah, we just started building and iterating on like all these like ideas that we had that might work and might not work. And I think over the last 2 years, what I've really been looking for is if we're making a Web3 game, why are we making a Web3 game? So, like, what is the Web3 component actually doing? What value is it providing for the players and for us as an ecosystem? And what are the killer features that really only exist in Web3 that don't quite exist in Web2? So that's been a lot of our iteration. we honed in on like a couple things really early on around interoperability. That was our initial hook that got people playing Pixels at first. When we started doing these avatar integrations, we were one of the first games to do that, if not like one of the like the first to start doing like 2D integrations of other NFTs inside of our game that we didn't release. And that was a great feature that I think, maybe could exist in Web 2, but it's just much harder to do in Web 2. Like you kind of see some cross IP collabs in Fortnite, things like that, but just Web 3 is one of those situations where it's 10x easier. So as we've been building for the last 2 years, we've been looking for those other things that unlock extra functionality that Web 3 makes like 10x, 100x easier. And one of those primitives that we saw was play to earn, where play to earn, it kind of became a dirty word over the last 2 years. I think because people saw Axie rise and fall. And, it's really easy to criticize something when it didn't work in its first iteration. And I think that's what we see a lot in Web3, where we see things that, had some promise, didn't quite work out. And our mindset here at Pixels has been, instead of just saying these things will never work, we kind of like to think about what if they did work and what's that look like if it does work? Like what's it unlock if you actually were able to make a play to earn game that was sustainable, that could actually, grow games in different ways than, Web 2 games could. Like, could you actually do it? Could you actually pull it off? And what's that look like? So yeah, we started leaning more into that like about a year and a half ago. And it has a lot of challenges associated with it, but it's also something that I think is probably a difference maker inside of Web3 gaming. The key thesis here is Web 2 games, they kind of do top-down growth, where they do performance marketing, where essentially they have a good idea of the types of users who might convert into paying users. They'll run ads on like different audiences, thinking, okay, I'm going to target like 40-year-old moms in this specific geography. Then they like drill down all the way through their funnels. They do tons of optimization there. And then eventually they'll like break it down to spend per user, right? And then they'll do the math, they'll figure it out. Now, our thesis here at Pixels is it's really kind of the opposite approach in Web3. And this is the big unlock, the bottoms up growth approach, basically, where what we like to do and we like to think about is who are the players inside of our ecosystem that provide the most value inside of the ecosystem? Can we identify them? And can we help give the right incentive structures for them to help our ecosystem grow? And there's a lot of nuance there. There's like some really cool stuff that we're building right now to do that. But to me, that's kind of the killer feature inside of Web3. But yeah, play to earn, I think, is one of those things that is, going to be more and more popular again. It's a lot of skill to execute on it successfully. And that's where we're trying to build the biggest competitive advantage, basically.
With Pixels as it is in its current state, could you quickly or just briefly break down what the various player cohorts kind of look like and who you're targeting and who sort of unintentionally, organically was onboarded?
If you were to look at our audience, it's a mid-core audience. So it's a mix of players who have typically played games before. And the gaming persona is like somewhat similar to the Stardew Valley persona. That would be like anywhere from like, 20 to like 40-year-olds are the typical player. It's not 50-50 split in terms of gender demographics, but it's probably closest to that in Web3, I would say. We actually do have like a pretty large female audience inside of Pixels, and honestly more like older women than you would typically expect as well, which is interesting. More of like the Candy Crush or like Farmville persona, to be honest. And then in addition, moving to the Ronin chain, it's not surprising. We've attracted a lot of the Southeast Asian audience. If you dig into the demographics, I would say that about like 50% of our users are in Southeast Asia, about like 20% in the US, 20% in APAC, 10% in LATAM. So yeah, moving to the Ronin chain is interesting because Ronin kind of acted like a distribution platform for us early on, or like a publisher in a way too, where they had a big user base onboarded into Ronin already that kind of already understood Web3 games. And they were like much easier to onboard. And yeah, that was the typical like Southeast Asian audience that we've onboarded into it. Yeah, they're a funny crowd. Inside of that particular audience, you have a mix of players. What people don't know about the Southeast Asian audience is they've actually played a lot of MMOs and other games like that. Like they're huge Ragnarok players, and they actually do have like deep gaming roots. But then yeah, Axie Infinity also, when it came up, activated a new type of persona as well. That was more of the earn-oriented persona. And a lot of what we think about when we think about who are the personas inside of Pixels is kind of that balance of the different personas, because all these personas, including the earn persona, actually do play a valuable role inside of the ecosystem. The question that we're kind of asking ourselves now is like, what are the right proportions of each persona that we want, and how do we create the incentive structures to kind of balance that out? Because what we do also see is like a conversion from the people who originally come to earn into these other player personas. We have a few things that we're doing to track that. We've kind of seen some flows of users from, you know, people who come for airdrops or other things like that into, like, I like to call them non-optimal players, but they're kind of like net pixel spenders at the end of the day, basically, which is exactly what you want inside of the game and ecosystem. But you also don't need that for every single user. Like, games typically monetize on 2% of their users. So when you think about what kind of distribution of users you need in the ecosystem, you don't necessarily need every single person to be net pixel spenders either. So I think a lot about those funnels, those incentive structures, you know, how we can identify those users earlier and actually create incentives for them to go in further through the pipeline. But yeah, it's an interesting mix of people.
Yeah, one thing that it seems like you keep bringing up, Luke, is this concept of sustainability, and you've talked about it from the like play to earn, kind of like the value, kind of extractive kind of angle. But you've also talked about it from like the community building angle. And I'm curious, when you think about sustainability, like where do you think your time is best spent, kind of implementing these levers that enable you kind of ex post after you implement something, like a soft currency, or
Yeah,
something like a land. Like, where do you think your time is best spent in kind of designing those sustainable levers? Is it at the community
yeah,
side, or is
100%.
it on the token side? Yeah, just kind of curious how you think about it.
Me personally, I'm all over. I love tokenomics and I love economics. Like, my background is in computer science and economics. I studied economics in university, and I thought that degree was going to be useless. I just really, really loved it. And it has turned out to be interesting. And I just, yeah, that's the part I love thinking about too, just the incentive design, like how we create efficient systems, digging into that. But yeah, we also have some great people on the team that are working on this too. I would say it's like twofold essentially. So part of what we are good at Pixels, I would say, is building community trust. And that's really important when you're building Web3, I think, because you really need that community to be there, whether things are going well when you're talking about markets or things that you can't control as a Web3 project. And you need the community to like still have faith in you, basically. So we've had experience with this with our own NFT collection, where, you know, NFT prices have been, they went up, they went down, they went up, they went down, and we kept that same community there. And then the other part is the incentive structures too. So, you know, you have to be careful to not always like give in to what the community asks for sometimes. Like, for example, we released an NFT collection and we had this NFT integrated into the game, this farmland NFT. It's like a relatively high value NFT, right? I think the floor price is sitting at something like $5,000. And that might create some expectations from the people who own this NFT. But if we had done everything that we wanted, or that those holders had wanted in the early days, what we would have built was an NFT game that only used their land, like only used this 5,000 NFT collection, and we wouldn't have any other users basically. So part of the understanding is like building trust with them and also creating the proper incentive structures that help grow the ecosystem too. When we started introducing like free to play mechanics inside of Pixels, the NFT holders were not happy. And, you know, sometimes you just have to do things that you think are good for them rather than what they ask for. And that's part of it too. Like, my focus from day one was building an ecosystem that could hit 10 million DAU. And yeah, if we only had a game that was built for 5,000 NFT holders, that wouldn't be very successful towards that goal. Even though, yeah, it might not be exactly what they were asking for at the time, right?
So after 1 year of essentially being live, having a live build and like building the community, 2 years of building the community, 1 year of having some sort of a game out with like, I think during that time there was less than like 100 daily active players. And now you're at over 1 million registered users slash wallets, and more than like 300K daily actives. What are some of the biggest takeaways you have from that experience?
Yeah. So the work that we did on community building in the beginning was super important, and we were able to scale that community building too, which was not the easiest, but we were relatively prepared for that, luckily. Yeah, our head of community, or like CMO, Heidi, she did a really good job of that. Basically kind of trying to figure out, how we can instill our values and then also empower people inside of our ecosystem to also maintain those values as well. A lot of the Heart of the Pixels is run on like volunteer work. The farm hands is what we call them. It's a group of like maybe 50 or 60 people inside the community who help guide new players, who are like extremely active in the Discord. And that's a huge part of it, basically. Like, we actually don't really tolerate like chatter inside the community that don't follow these values. Um, and yeah, that's important, because you need to have that strong community and that strong guiding value in all of your community in order to maintain like sanity when things go really well or when they go bad too. And I think that's part of it too. In Web3, things go well and things sometimes don't go well, and you need that foundation there even when things are going well, in order to kind of bear when things aren't going as well. So yeah, that's been a huge part of the strategy there, all the community building that we do. Um, and then, yeah, the other part too was making sure that we like had sufficient time to like learn these lessons as well. We had basically been battle testing all of the things that come with scale in Web3 for a year and a half before we, hit more DAU. And that's things like some of the incentive design, some of the like bot prevention detection, some of the like right reward structures. Yeah, it was a lot of lessons that we've learned over the last year and a half before we got here. And yeah, we feel a lot more comfortable now. It's interesting because now I feel like we're in a phase at Pixels where we're pretty confident in what the next like 1 to 2 years looks like when it comes to the high level. We have like a strong vision. It's loosely held where we know we're gonna have to iterate, adjust things a lot. But like the core of what we're working on, we feel pretty confident in now after basically iterating so much the last year and a half, 2 years.
From your internal audits, what percentage of that more than 300K dailies is bots, and what are like real unique users?
Yeah, so it's funny because bot prevention detection is the most not talked about thing in Web3 gaming. And it's actually probably the most important. You can't talk about play to earn unless you have a grasp on this. And it's funny because I think some Web3 founders think that their game won't get botted. Or they like look at other games and they're like, oh, Pixel's just full of bots. Like, there's nothing, my game won't have this issue. But if you look at what's going on in general botting, there's bots that play Warzone. Have you seen that video of that bot recently that it plays Warzone extremely competitively? It detects when the anti-cheat turns on, it turns itself off. And then when the anti-cheat check is done, it turns itself back on. It's crazy what's going to happen. So basically, with botting, there's kind of three different approaches that you can take. You can do the eyeball scanning, where you have like 100% proof of personhood, and you know that this person's a real user. I think some games are going to have to do that if they want to maintain competitiveness and if they want to maintain some structures like that. There's on-chain reputation that you can do, and there's like some other stuff as well. And then there's also like basically a barrier to entry. Like, if you just make it so that you never actually earn anything, people probably won't bot it. So what we're estimating right now, like current daily active addresses is I think like 520,000 today. It looks like about 25% bots inside the ecosystem. This is because we turned off some of the incentive design, or some of the barriers in the short term, that we were doing previously with our soft currency. We kind of wanted to like basically test, okay, like how hard do we need to go on some of the anti-bot measures that we had before, and how do we turn them on? But when we had the soft currency inside of the game, basically for the last year, this is the thing that we're dealing with almost the entire time. How do you remove bots out of the game? How do you create good incentive structures? For us, the eyeball scanning, WorldCoin, or like KYC didn't really feel like a viable option if we wanted to scale. In Web2 gaming, right, you are literally optimizing like tiny percents and fractions of percents to get users through your funnels. And if you put KYC in front of playing the game, that's just not possible. You're never going to get any players, or at least it'll be extremely expensive. I think exchanges, their customer acquisition cost for a KYC user is something like $100. And that just won't make any sense for any Web3 game, I don't think. So our approach has been threefold. For bot prevention and detection, I think one, it just becomes like a data science issue. So you have to do some like basically retroactive sweeps like any MMO does, where you'll basically look at the data that you have on your users. You look at these users, you can kind of identify bot activity sometimes. It's a game of cat and mouse. And it's not very easy, but it's somewhat effective in the retroactive. Two, there's like some prevention stuff that you can do, but actually almost nothing works if there's an incentive structure behind it, like captchas, reCAPTCHA, CloudFront, anything like that truly does not work. Anybody building in the space already kind of knows that, but it's a dirty secret. Honestly, captchas are just for making users feel better about things, but they are 0% effective. You can go and buy I think like 10,000 CAPTCHA verifications for pennies, or people just basically do mTurk on them, so that you might even have a human doing the CAPTCHA and then the bot signs it and then it's good to go. So that doesn't work. We've experimented with a couple other things too. We have like two things that we've been working on that kind of help this. One, putting an economic barrier in front of some of the earnings. So we have this thing called VIP. It's essentially like a battle pass where I think we charge $30 for 3 months of it right now. And we gate a lot of the earnings inside of the game behind this battle pass. And the goal is basically you have to buy this battle pass, you get more earnings inside of the game. And then that kind of gives us a time frame of bot earnings where, if the bot's playing the game for 2 weeks, they earn X dollars. If we ban them and catch them before that, then they're in the red. So there should be no economic incentive there. We kind of want to tweak around like what those numbers look like, but that actually has been very effective. And then the other thing is in game design too, like your game, the way it's designed, if you don't want to do hard KYC, is actually extremely important when it comes to bot detection and prevention. This is part of the incentive design problem that you have to think about in the Web3 game as well, where you build a game where the incentive structures are so that if you have 1,000 accounts controlled by one person, you get more earnings, then people will bot it. So you can't create a game where having more accounts gives an advantage to what you're doing here. And that's the big focus of our next release, Chapter 2. That's releasing in like early April, it looks like. But we're making drastic changes to the game design for that reason. So we're making changes where in Chapter 2, basically there's way more scarcity inside of the ecosystem. There's basically a max cap of resources that can be generated a day. We're making it so that you can only farm on one plot of land at a time globally. So if you own a farmland and somebody comes onto your farm, they're taking up a space in your farm that you can't farm anymore. And this is where guilds integrate into it too. We're introducing guilds and we're actually integrating them inside of the game. And what we're doing is we're actually having guilds kind of self-govern this. So guilds will be the managers of land now. And if a bot comes onto a guild's land and they're farming on that guild's land, now what it's going to do is it's going to be taking away resources from the guild. So the guild has more of an incentive to self-police the resource extraction on top of their land. And yeah, we think about it that way. Basically, it's almost like you can kind of think about it like decentralized bot detection in a way, but really it's incentive alignment, where now we're kind of removing the incentive to create tons of accounts because it actually gives no advantage side of the game with this global scarcity. And yeah, it's a big change to how people typically interact with the game, but it's one that I think we have to add if we want to still kind of go down the free to play or like freemium route and not require hard KYC.
So when you kind of formalize this social behavior with guilds, like what's the new type of behavior that you're trying to incentivize there? Is it that you're trying to add a new social incentive layer that is kind of monetized in a different way through these like friend tech like mechanisms, or is it something else that maybe we're missing?
So the core thing that we're trying to facilitate, I think, is we want to give groups of people shared missions and shared objectives to work on that also are somewhat competitive with those other groups of people, right? Like the guilds, when we first release it, I think like just the social fi aspects releasing either this week or early next week. But then they'll have the integration with like the resource collection loops in the release of Chapter 2 in early April. It's not going to be like crazy competitive, even though it will be in some ways, because these guilds are going to fight for users to get into their guild. They're going to want to have more members inside of their guild because of the bonding curve stuff. It's like some interesting competition that you can add already there. But then what we're expanding on that, this is probably going to release in like May to June, is competitive guild gameplay. Right now, I think Pixels is kind of lacking endgame, and that's what we've known for a while. And we're finally introducing it, where we're introducing this new type of land inside of the game. You'll have to like go and discover it through this like caves and dungeons system. And essentially how it's going to work is guilds will be able to capture this land. It's like an objective that a single player alone probably couldn't accomplish, but maybe we'll see some players that are absolute whales try to go and do that themselves anyways. But it's going to be much, much easier to do it as a group. And that's where these guilds come into play, where it's essentially vying for the most rare resources, and these guilds are going to have to compete to get access to the most rare resources inside of the game, which in turn, these most rare resources are turned into Pixel. There's like some really interesting ways that you can incentivize this through the earn mechanisms and like the reward structure that you create on top of that as well. The reason why we're adding bonding curves into the guild system and how it's basically going to work is to join a guild, you'll need to pay Pixel to join the guild. Part of the guild fee or part of the guild membership, it's like taken off as a fee. 5% of like the guild membership cost goes to the guild, 5% goes to Pixels, or actually like, it's an 80-20 split between community treasury and then going back into the ecosystem. But yeah, basically 5% goes back to the guild. They have an incentive structure to go recruit new members inside of their guild for that reason. But then also the price they join the guild increases. So eventually it's going to be not optimal to join the guild, right? Because the value that the guild provides back to the users in terms of gameplay, or maybe they're like redistributing earnings, any of that, they just can't support that many members. And that's kind of the idea there, where it's like we kind of want an optimal guild size. We want to have that incentive structure to keep them competitive, right? So if a guild actually isn't doing their job in terms of like, providing all the stuff these guild members want, the guild members can leave. And it's actually not great for the guild when it happens as well too. But then what we want to do is we want to leave the actual guild structure to be extremely open-ended and really let the guilds decide.
So far, it sounds like there's, at least at the present moment, a lack of emphasis on like in-app purchases and more on like incentive alignment and taking like percentages of whether it be marketplace fees or the guild fees, etc. Like, how are you kind of viewing making this like a revenue generating business? And is it just, traditional IAPs, or do you think that there's some interesting stuff that maybe is largely unexplored in like a traditional environment?
Yeah, so we're focusing on token value accrual before anything else right now. We're just like really focusing on how we have the token as useful as possible and how it's used in game. So we actually have burned a lot of Pixel over the last 2-3 weeks. I think something like, I have the number right here, 4.29 million Pixel over the last 21 days, or however long it's been since the token launch. We were actually generating a decent amount of revenue before we launched the Pixel token. We sold these VIP passes in the Ronin token, and I think we were generating something like 600 to 700,000 Ronin tokens a month doing that. It was an average of like 30 to 40,000 US dollars a day. But yeah, short to medium term focus is really just on making sure that this token is as useful as possible inside of the ecosystem and building out multiple systems that use this token. So the VIP pass is a really good one. I think yesterday we sold 3,600 at 40 Pixel each, which is something like 122,000 Pixel, about like 100,000 US dollars equivalent of the Pixel token. And that's been the approach. It's like really, we're thinking about monetization of the Pixel token in the same way that Web2 developers think about, game monetization. It's just in the token instead. That was kind of the point of doing this all. And the whole idea is like, we want to match, the earnings with the token utility in the long run. In the short run, it doesn't necessarily need to. Like a little inflation is okay. And the way that we actually have set up the tokenomics is there's controlled inflation in this token. We know exactly the max amount of emissions that we can have each month. It's predictable. It's on chain. You can actually see how much the ecosystem reward pool invests as well too. And that predictability is really important when markets want to make decisions. In our previous token, the soft currency, Berry, it was what it was called. We had no control over that inflation. Essentially, it was controlled by like things like crop time growth or like time between planting. It was like very, very hard to control that. We have like the exact levers here on how we do that in this token, the Pixel token.
And that just about wraps it up for today. Luke, it's been super interesting, actually. I've enjoyed this one. We've spent some time talking about incentive structures, value alignment, distributed value, bottom up growth, like community evangelism, kind of going through the journey over like from where you were a year and a half ago to today. Big props again for like the successful launch, and sounds like there's a lot more to be excited moving into the future. And yeah, thanks for the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. No, this is a fun one.
The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.